All right, today we're jumping into a source document that makes a pretty wild claim. A claim about how the United States government actually works. It's an idea that's been floating around for almost 100 years, and you know what? It really challenges the core of what most of us learn in school about the separation of powers.
So we all know this one, right? It's the classic Civics 101 picture of the U.S. government. You've got three branches, they're all equal, and they all play by the rules laid out in the Constitution. This is the starting point, the way things are supposed to be.
Okay, but the source we're examining today says, nope, not so fast. It argues that this whole picture is, and I'm quoting here, factually and legally false. The claim is that for decades there's been a whole other system of government running alongside the one we know. So, how did we get here? To really get what this is all about, we have to go way back. We're talking about the 1930s, right in the thick of the Great Depression. The entire argument really comes down to just one law, passed when the country was in a massive crisis.
So let's lay out the timeline. It all starts back in 1917, during World War I, with a law called the Trading with the Enemy Act. A wartime law, makes sense. Fast forward to 1933, FDR is now president, the economy's in a free fall, banks are failing, and Congress passes the Emergency Banking Act in a single day. Now this is where it gets really interesting.
See, this new act in 1933 didn't create a totally new power from scratch. Instead, it just made a tiny little edit to that old 1917 law. Look at this. It took the phrase during time of war and just added these little words or during any other period of national emergency declared by the president. And just like that, a power meant for wartime could now be used anytime, in peace. And you have to understand, the mood in Congress was pure chaos. This quote here, from the very day the bill passed, paints a perfect picture. A congressman said the bill was pushed through with cyclonic speed after only 40 minutes of debate. Most of the people voting on it hadn't even had a chance to read it. This was not business as usual.
So a year later, the Supreme Court gets involved. In a big case, they made what seems like a really clear statement. They said an emergency doesn't just create new power out of thin air. The rules of the Constitution don't just disappear because things get tough.
Hearing that, you'd probably think, okay, great, the court stepped in and shut this down, right? It sounds like a total rejection of the whole idea. But is that really what happened?
Well, here's the kicker from the exact same court ruling. The court added this little phrase: while an emergency doesn't create power, it can provide the occasion for the exercise of power. And according to the source we're looking at, that was everything. It was basically the Supreme Court giving a green light to use these new authorities. Okay, let's hit the fast-forward button and jump ahead 40 years to the 1970s. We're in the era of the Vietnam War and Watergate, and people are, well, they're pretty suspicious of presidential power. So Congress decides, hey, maybe we should look into how many of these emergency powers are actually on the books.
A special Senate committee got to work, and what they uncovered was, honestly, it was mind-blowing. Look at this number, 470. That's how many different federal laws they found that a president could just switch on, like a light, simply by declaring a national emergency.
The committee's official report, Senate Report 93-549, is the source for all of this, and their own words were incredibly blunt. They wrote that these powers gave the president nearly unlimited authority. And remember, this isn't some critic saying this. This is the United States Senate itself.
And the main takeaways from the report were just explosive. First, they found that a national emergency had been going on, nonstop, since 1933. And get this, they said these powers gave the president the ability to, and I'm quoting directly from the report, rule the country without reference to normal constitutional processes. Wow. So after putting out a report that's shocking, Congress kind of had to do something, right? They started working on a way to get these powers under control and finally put an end to this 40-year-long state of emergency. And what they came up with was the National Emergencies Act of 1976. The idea seemed pretty simple. Let's just wipe the slate clean, end all the old emergency declarations, and create a clear set of rules for the future. It was supposed to be the big fix. But, and this is the absolute key according to the source, tucked away inside that 1976 law was a massive exception. It clearly stated that the powers from the Trading with the Enemy Act, yeah, the same one from 1933, would stay on the books. The most powerful tool of all was left right where it was.
So let's just take a breath and put all the pieces together. Let's walk through the entire chain of events, from that original wartime law all the way to that so-called fix.
Here's the argument laid out step by step. Number one, a law for wartime gets repurposed for a peacetime crisis.
Number 2, 40 years later, the Senate itself confirms this has created a system of power outside the Constitution. And number 3, the law that was supposed to fix it all makes a special exception to preserve that original, most powerful framework.
And all of that brings us to one last, really big question. This isn't just a history lesson, because the source argues this whole setup is still in place right now. So if a national emergency can unlock all these powers, and that legal framework has been carefully protected for over 90 years, what does it even mean for an emergency to end? It's a question that really cuts to the heart of the balance between keeping us safe in a crisis and sticking to the rules of constitutional government.